Hello and welcome back to the Bird's Eye View podcast. We are here with a very special guest today. My name is Zach Worden, joined as always by Jori Negin-Shecter, and we are thrilled to have Scott Crawford, the Director of Operations at the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame, joining us today. Scott, thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Hey, it's always a pleasure, Zach. It'd be great to chat baseball with you guys.
Yeah, super exciting with the induction ceremony coming up this weekend. A great six-person class. I guess before we can kind of get into some of the inductees individually, can I just get your thoughts on the class overall and kind of what you're excited about for the weekend?
Yeah, I mean, the class is once again a great class because it's a wide variety, right? We're not just about the players. We're about different aspects of the game, and because you need all aspects of the game to play, right? I mean, we do have famous players but we also have women national team players. We have presidents, CEOs. We have volunteer executives. National team players. So it's one of those things where it's a wide variety, which is good because like we always say here, I mean, we've inducted umpires and scorekeepers and announcers and whatnot. Like it takes all kinds of expertise to do a baseball game.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously with the weekend, my first one was last year, which was super exciting. Really enjoyed it, and I think it was an awesome event. But for you, having been part of so many, what is kind of just overall your favorite part of induction weekend?
It's actually hearing their speeches and like you say speeches, sometimes they get long and drawn out, but these are famous baseball players and I grew up watching them or I've read stories about them and I just listen to them, talk about their youth and growing up and thanking their coaches and because it takes a lot of people. I mean, they might be able to hit a baseball or throw a baseball, but someone had to teach them, right? And that's really important. And then when Fergie Jenkins gets up and puts the jacket on them, I mean, that's a monumental moment. Like just imagine standing on stage and having the greatest pitcher ever from Canada put a Hall of Fame jacket on your shoulders. I mean, that is just, that's just picturesque and can't wait to see it happen again this year.
Yeah, super special for sure. I'm curious too with you obviously, being so involved in everything. Do you kind of have any like a specific favorite memory that kind of stands out to you from any of the ceremonies?
I think one of the ones is just, when the guys, they're all Hall of Fame players, obviously great players, but just their personalities and they're just an average Joe people. I mean, I always talk about Tom Hankey. We all know him as the Terminator and the greatest Blue Jay closer ever. And he's just one of the guys where he's just so down to earth. And you couldn't tell he saved 300 games in the big leagues and could easily be in Cooperstown. He was just like, "Hi, Scott, how's it going?" He rented a bus for his town to come up, so 50 people from his hometown could come and make the trip to see his induction. He paid for all the expenses, and he's just like, what's going on? Like he was just an average Joe, like us three talking baseball, and yet it's Tom Hankey, the greatest Blue Jay reliever ever. And I just those moments like that are really, really memorable.
Yeah, very cool for sure. You kind of touched on it with the class and having a wide-ranging impact on the game, but for you kind of being able to be involved with the election of all of them and seeing kind of the setup with everything, what would you kind of say for just like the collective impact that this group has had on baseball across the country?
I think it's huge. I mean, and start with Ashley Stephenson, right? I mean, Ashley is the greatest women's national team player ever. She's the first woman that represented Canada nationally that we're inducting into our Hall of Fame, and that's huge. And there'll be many more down the line. That's for sure. As a women's national team program started in 2004, so it's gaining great history to the program. And but Ashley's number one. Obviously we all saw Russell Martin play, whether you're a Blue Jay fan or Dodgers fan or Pittsburgh or Yankees. I mean, he was one of the best players of his generation, let alone whether he's from Canada or not. He was one of the best catchers of his time. And we got the Jimmy Key from the 80s. Again, who'd you watch from the Blue Jays in the 80s? It was Dave Steve, Jimmy Key, Tom Hankey, hitter wise, of course, Ernie Witt and George Bell and Lloyd Mosby. Like it was the 80s, and Jimmy Key sort of adds to that for sure. Like Paul Godfrey, he helped, Paul Godfrey has a huge history, from starting, he helped get the Blue Jays back in the late 70s. He helped get the Sky Dome at the time built, now Rogers Center. He was president and CEO of the Blue Jays. so he's been there right from day one, and quite significant. And Rod Heisler pitched for Canada in the 70s and 80s, 13 times he represented our country, so he gave back a ton of times. And then Howie Burney is 60 to 70 years in the game in Toronto, just with helping out with minor ball in Toronto and Leaside. And again, kids can't play ball. There aren't people helping to organize coaches and umpires and executives and whatnot. And Howie's the guy who's done that in the province for a long, long time.
Scott, I want to ask you a little bit more about the first name you mentioned there, Ashley Stephenson, and get into her role in Canadian baseball and just as a whole in growing the game. And you mentioned it, obviously, prolific national team career, but I'd be curious just to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on just her overall impact as a whole to the game of baseball in Canada.
Yeah, her impact's huge. I mean, she was on the first team back in 2004 when the IBAF at the time, that's what they were called, started women's international baseball official tournaments, right? There was a bit of play before that, but it officially started in 2004. And actually, Canada hosted the first official tournament, which is pretty neat. And she's there right from day one. She's retired from the national team now, of course. But she's been hired by the Toronto Blue Jays to coach out in Vancouver in their single A team. This is her second year out there. And it just goes to show, I mean, if the Toronto Blue Jays are hiring you as a coach to coach their single A team, where that's their future, obviously it's their minor leagues, they're hoping all those guys in Vancouver are playing in Toronto one day. That shows you how important it is. They're putting her with the future kids that they want to play in Toronto. And just her development, her encouraging girls to play baseball. All the provinces are now hosting, women's national teams and clinics and tournaments and whatnot. And actually on induction day, we're going to have a girls baseball clinic here run by Baseball Ontario, which is pretty cool. And Ashley's going to go down and say hi to all the girls that are playing ball and learning the game. And, she'll shake hands and take pictures. And so it's a really cool moment for all those girls that come to the clinic that the OBA are running on Saturday. And you can't say enough about her passion and her hard work to try to create more girls baseball in Ontario and across Canada. So it's fantastic.
For sure. And even having had the chance to meet her before in the past, is a genuinely good human being as well. So absolutely a worthwhile recipient of this honor. Can you speak a little bit more as well? I mean, she's obviously moved on to coaching now. A big part of that, of course, is the baseball IQ, right? Just as a ball player, very talented.
It is for sure. I mean, she's a teacher as well. I mean, that's been her profession when she's not playing for Baseball Canada. So she knows how to deal with children. That helps her when she's coaching the kids, the future ball players of the province or the country. And it would also help her teach her, because again, it's Vancouver and single A. There's a lot of 20-year-old, we'll call them kids, because they're just getting into their pro careers. And she can speak. She's played all over the world with the national team. She's coached all over the country with Baseball Canada and with the Toronto Blue Jays. And now she's hired to work with these new professionals. That there's a lot of pressure, a lot of first time away from home, a lot of dealing with different aspects of life that some of these 20-year-olds have never dealt with before. And with her being a teacher, I think that's a great grasp or a great concrete footing for her to be able to do that.
I'm curious with her coming in. Last year we had Kevin Glue on the podcast to kind of tee up the weekend, and he had mentioned that at having more women inducted is something that he hoped would happen in the future. And I'm curious kind of with the interest around her going in, because it seems like to me there's been a ton of interest around this class, and she's kind of at the forefront of it. Obviously, like you mentioned, some great players and all that, but it seems like she's really become almost the face of the class. And I'm kind of curious what the interest has been like kind of on your side as the director and everything, seeing that as she goes in.
Yeah, I think it's because she's the first. I mean, she's not the first woman in our Hall of Fame, because the ladies from the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League are in, but she's the first woman to represent Baseball Canada and representing our country, getting in the Hall of Fame, which is monumental and historic. And I think that's really brought the limelight to women's baseball. I mean, that's, Baseball Ontario asked me instantly if they could host a girls clinic here that day. And it was an easy yes, like the field's yours. What do you want to do? And so they're organizing all that, which is fantastic. And there's going to be a girls game after the ceremony. So again,
Nice.
which is going to be wonderful. And so I think, you know, she's just brought a lot of attention to it, mostly because she's the first and because everyone knows her and she's the nicest person in the world. So I mean that really helps as well. And so it's definitely, I expect a large crowd and a large contingent of Ashley fans and Baseball Canada fans, because again, she wore that jersey for many, many years.
Yeah, I'm sure her speech is gonna be outstanding for sure. Let's keep moving on through the inductees here. Russell Martin, obviously one of the greatest Canadian baseball players ever, probably the greatest Canadian catcher ever. For you, kind of seeing him in this class, what has made him so special as a baseball player?
I look at him as he's one of the guys that could play the game on both sides of the field, you know, like defensively and offensively, and being a catcher. And he played for 15 years and about over 1,000 games. Like I would call Russell one of the top 5 players in the history of Canadian baseball, because there aren't many players that I can play good defense and be a good hitter. And then you throw in he was a catcher, right? Which is the hardest position in baseball to play. And you look, he was a 4-time All-Star. He won our Tip O'Neill Award. He won Silver Slugger Award. He got his teams to the playoffs. I'm gonna get the number of years wrong, but like 10 of his 14 years he played in the big leagues, I think his teams were in the playoffs. Like, and again, one person doesn't get you in the playoffs, but you see him as the catcher, and the catchers are a lot of seen as the leaders of the team. And I think he had a lot to do in the clubhouse with having good clubhouses, making sure people were doing what they're supposed to do. And hey, if you make the playoffs 10 years in your career, you're doing something right and you're on a good ball team. So he's a legend, you know, on and off the field, and one of the best players of his generation, let alone one of the best Canadians ever.
Well, highly decorated, obviously, career. And something that I don't even think can be mentioned is obviously him coming to the Blue Jays is really what turned the tide for them during, you know, that stretch in 2015 and 2016, of course. I mean, I think back to that time, and of course, there's the iconic, you know, Russell call that is burned into the memory of so many Canadian baseball fans. And I feel like Martin is an understated part of even just growing the game in Canada because of the success that he, along with, of course, guys like Jose Bautista or Edwin Encarnacion, had with those really exceptional Blue Jays teams in the mid 2010s.
Yeah, he's one of the key people. I mean, again, you got to bring in those key veterans, right? They signed him to a long-term deal, which worked out very well. Obviously, he went off to the Dodgers for his last year. But you know, you got to bring in, and they brought in several players there. Obviously, like you said, they had Batista and Edwin, but they brought in Tulowitzki and David Price and a few others I'm forgetting, obviously. But you know, Russell, again, I see he's the catcher. The catcher is the leader of the team. You know, in most teams' sake, and I say Russell would have been the leader of that team. And he played every day. He played hurt. He played hard, and he played well in those pressure-packed situations. And we all remember when he threw that ball back and hit Cho's bat knob in the confusing 7th inning of that game. But you know, that was just one of the unique highlights of Russell's career in Toronto. But there's so many memorable things, and he had so many key hits. And yeah, I mean, without Russell those couple of years, I think the Jays would have had a hard time making the playoffs.
Yeah, definitely a huge impact for him. One thing that he has done is he's been pretty involved with Baseball Canada, kind of following his playing career. I'm curious for you, like kind of seeing players do that. What does that mean for, you know, not only baseball across the country, but like the Baseball Canada program specifically, and just kind of the growth of the game with younger players being able to work with the Russell Martin. I know like Bo Naylor, having the opportunity to work with him is super cool for like younger catchers in this country.
Yeah, oh, for sure. I mean, Greg Hamilton and his team in Baseball Canada run amazing programs, and they have so many alumni come back and support the junior team and the senior team once the players are retired. And it's so great to see. I mean, if those players didn't enjoy their time with Baseball Canada, or they didn't appreciate Baseball Canada, they wouldn't come back and help them. So every time Baseball Canada has a tournament or camps, and Greg's organizing them, and you see all the alumni that's back, and it's just amazing to me. And Russell's done that a few times, and which is great. And I think he'll do more in the future. Again, it's like, it's a way to give back to get back to the programs that helped you get there. I mean, Russell played on the Baseball Canada as a junior, right? And you know, he was a third baseman, catcher, shortstop. Obviously, he turned into an amazing catcher, but he had great hands for the whole infield. And I think it's just one of those things that, you know, and it's important to us at the Hall of Fame because it shows that they're giving back to the country, giving back. Like, of course, to get in the Hall of Fame, we look at all aspects of their career on the field, off the field, after their playing days. Like, it all adds up, right? And you know, when we can see players giving back to the youth, whether it's, you know, whether it's their hometown team, like, you know, for example, Jeff Francis, he's coaching his kids' teams. He's giving back to the youth of London. And he's also coached Baseball Canada, so no doubt. And Jeff was in our Hall of Fame in 2022. But just it's really important to see the players giving back as well after they're done playing.
Yeah, and I think that's obviously a common theme between both Ashley and Russell to kind of as our conversation goes along here. But yeah, let's keep going on through them. Paul Godfrey, a obviously very important figure in Toronto baseball, being part of the team that brought the Blue Jays to Toronto, and of course got, as you mentioned earlier, got the dome to be a baseball field. For him coming in, what kind of does that represent for the Hall of Fame, having like such an important figure in Blue Jays history going into the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, when you look at our list of Hall of Famers, we had a lot of them in already, like the Beestons and the Witheringtons and the Gillicks and the I'm forgetting a few of them, but you know, so it was like, you know, Paul Godfrey was there with all of them all along the way, and he wasn't in. And but if you look back, you know, with the people who all started the Blue Jays back in the early 70s or sorry, late 70s, and they really Paul was one of them. He was down, you know, the San Francisco Giants were almost going to come to Toronto, as we all know that history. And when that got stopped last minute, Don McDougall with Labatt's and Paul Godfrey with you know, put their pressure on and power in, and they got the team, an expansion team for the Blue Jays, which is really important. And Don's also in our Hall of Fame. So Paul helped get that team just very quickly to expansion team of the Blue Jays and made it happen. And then his next goal after that was he's already starting to think about the Sky Dome, Rogers Center, of course, now, but the Sky Dome at the time, he wanted to get a dome stadium built. So, I mean, those don't get built in a day, and it opened in 1989. So it was a several year process to get that happen. So basically started almost right away. And he was the main person behind getting the dome built. And then, you know, take a few years later, he was all of a sudden the president and CEO of the Blue Jays through the whole 2000, the first decades of the 2000. So he was in charge of all the different aspects then. And that's when it became Rogers Center, I believe, was in the early 2000s. So that was a major changeover, obviously, that would have taken, again, years to develop and finalize and whatnot. And so Paul's one of those guys that's been there, you know, you can sort of say since day one, right? He got the Blue Jays, he got the Rogers Center, and then he ran the team. So he's been there in all aspects for, you know, good 30 years.
Absolutely. Undoubtedly one of the most important figures in Blue Jays history, even if, you know, not every, you know, casual fan maybe is so intimately familiar. Scott, I would be curious. Obviously, it's, you know, inherent that you're going to be inducting, you know, players and such, but obviously with Godfrey, he's such an important builder. But I would be curious from your perspective about just the importance of including both players, you know, and builders in the Hall of Fame, and the importance of a builder like a Godfrey.
Well, sure. I mean, it's vitally important. And like I mentioned earlier, like, we're not about just players, right? I mean, you look at, like, last year we inducted Joe Weichart. He's from Manitoba. He did his 5 decades of the game in baseball, actually more than that. You know, and again, like we mentioned a few other people, you know, like Rob Thompson's the manager of Philadelphia. He's in our Hall of Fame. He coached for 2 decades with the Yankees during their dynasty, and then obviously on to the Phillies the last few years. You know, builders are just as important as players, because again, if there aren't the builders running the game, and then you don't have the players playing the game. So to us, that's why, you know, you look at most of our classes over the last 30 years, and most of our classes are a mix of players and non-players.
Yeah, it's super intriguing for sure. And I mean, you know, one of those things that, like, for me, not originally being from Toronto, like, one of those things that just kind of like going through the class a little bit is something that I've learned a ton about, is like kind of the impact of Paul Godfrey and others like him. Let's just keep on moving though. A very interesting or exciting ad, I think, is Jimmy Key, and a great pitcher in Blue Jays history, probably one of the top starters in franchise history. He pitched in Medicine Hat, which is a super cool story for him as well. For you seeing Key go in, what kind of impact did he have on those early Blue Jays teams, as far as like being part of the group that got them to a point where they were ready to compete for the World Series that they ended up winning?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you look again at the 80s and the top two starting pitchers, Dave, Steve, Jimmy Key, basically the whole decade. And there are a few other good ones, obviously, but you talk the main ones. It's Dave, Steve, and Jimmy Key. Dave's in our Hall of Fame already. Jimmy was long overdue, and is finally so glad to get him into the Hall of Fame. He was that crafty lefty that we all, wish we could be, but we couldn't throw with our left arm. He wouldn't throw it hard. He'd mid-80s. He'd sort of like sling it 3/4 arm, but you couldn't hit him. I mean, his ERA was in the twos a couple of years. His career ERA is 3.34, I believe, like right around there. And he was an all-star. He finished second in Cy Young in '87 when arguably he could have won it that year. He's one of those guys that, started during the Jays' rough times in their early 80s and worked his way, obviously, 85 up to 92 when they won the World Series. And Key was a huge part of that World Series win in 92. And then he left after that, as players do for free agency and whatnot. But for that decade with the Blue Jays, he was, just as equal as the Dave Steves that are already in our Hall of Fame.
Scott, obviously the two of us a little bit, Jimmy Key obviously a little bit before our time. So I would be curious, even just for you as someone that's got a couple years on us, so to speak, just your memories of Jimmy Key as a Blue Jay.
Yeah, I just remember Jimmy as just one of those guys that didn't have ups and downs. Like you always hear Dave Steve stories of how he's so intense and he would yell at opposing players or even his own players when something happened. And like Jimmy was just quiet. He's just that soft-spoken lefty that is such a traditional thing to say about lefties. But he didn't throw hard. He went out and did his stuff. He pitched well, almost every time and almost every year. And he played all the time. You just see him as like, and there wasn't a lot of news about him because he was a quiet guy. Like, Dave Steve was intense, and that's what worked for him. And obviously Dave Steve is one of the best pitchers in Blue Jay history, and his style worked. I mean, Jimmy Key's style was quiet and just get the job done, go sit in the dugout between innings, go back out, get 3 more outs. We didn't strike out a ton of guys. He had a lot of contact. But again, he was just one of those soft throwing 3/4 arm lefties that every team wanted because Jimmy could get everybody out.
One thing that I think is super interesting with that era of Blue Jays, and I mean, obviously for me going last year, like kind of seeing the reception that, John Olerud and Jesse Barfield got, obviously very, very good. Of course, Blue Jays fans love those teams, the World Series teams, the teams that built up to them. Just what kind of reception have you seen over the course of the years that these guys get as they come back? I know Jimmy Key's like unfortunately not able to make the ceremony this year, but for kind of those 80s and 90s Jays, how cool is it to kind of see the reception that people give them when they do come to St. Mary's for their induction ceremonies?
It's awesome. I mean, Jesse Barfield last year, for example, I mean, he's such a fan favorite. And again, it's because he's outgoing and always happy, always having a good time, always laughing with the fans, talking to the fans, taking pictures, signing autographs. The Blue Jays, you're right. The Blue Jay fans love their guys from the 80s. When Tom Henke and Ernie Witt, and I mean, Lloyd, we got the whole outfield, Mosby, Bell, and Barfield. We got Tony Fernandez, and of course, early 90s, of course, with Ward and John Olerud and whatnot, and Delgado, but the fans just love those guys. I think it's because this is the first time the Jays were good. Like they were new in '77, and they were bad for obviously a few years being an expansion team, and then they got really good. And the fans remember those days of the first time they were good, and they just don't let go.
Yeah, with that, I mean, now that we're kind of getting into the era where like kind of those 15 and 16 Jays are starting to go in with the Russell Martins of the world, are you kind of expecting to see like then maybe like the next group of Blue Jays fans kind of start to do that for those guys as they go in?
I think so. Yeah, there's a lot of people say about Russell. I mean, he's a young kid. He's born in '83, so he's only 41. And but he played for the Jays. You know, everyone remembers the 15, 16 years where the Jays were all of a sudden really good again and made the playoffs again, and you trade for all these veterans or signed all these veterans, and they went for it basically, and obviously didn't win the World Series, but they got the fan base back. They made the playoffs. They did very, very well. So I think, you know, I think the next generation of fans is definitely going to fall in love, you know, more with the Hall of Fame because they more relate to these inductees. I mean, the last few years, you know, we inducted a lot of Canadians that were, you know, from the last few years, from Justin Morneau and Jason Bay and Ryan Dempster and, you know, Jeff Francis and Rich Harden, you know, all guys that, again, are all Canadians and they're all in their early 40s. So they all played in the last 15 years. But Russell just adds to that. Russell's got the connection. He played in Toronto, so that gives me even a more connection and than some of these other guys that had amazing careers like Justin Morneau, but he mostly played in Minnesota, and then he went down to Chicago and stuff. So Russell's got that extra special connection with the Toronto fans.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to Rod Heisler. I think one of the more unique inductees this year for sure, being a like an Olympic pitcher, a guy who pitched just a ton for Canada in his baseball career. How did you, or I mean, kind of seeing him go in, how did it kind of come about for him to be inducted, and what has kind of been the reaction to him going in?
Yeah, I think the reaction is like oh, who, you know, like, who's Rod Heisler, right? I mean, and not to be mean to Rod at all. I mean, but again, like, people are like, don't know the story, and that's what the Hall of Fame museums are about, is telling the stories, telling the history of the game, and telling people that Rod Heisler was darn good. Rod Heisler is one of the best pitchers in Canada for over a decade. He pitched for Canada 13 different times, and he was the starting pitcher in the 1984 Olympics for us in Game 1. Now, it wasn't an official sport, baseball, in '84, but he started Game 1 in Dodger Stadium for us, and he pitched very, very, very well. And then he went on 12 more times for us to represent us at Pan Am Games and Goodwill Games and all kinds of senior national tournaments. And you know, if he didn't play professional baseball. He represented Canada 13 times for amateur baseball, and we look back and go like, wow, that's impressive. You know, because he had to have his own life and his own living and his own jobs and everything, but he suited up for Canada every time they called for those 13 times. And his most disappointing part, he said, was the 1988 Olympics. He was on the roster. He went overseas to get ready to play for them, and then he hurt his arm. So he didn't actually get to pitch in the '88 Olympics, even though he was on the team. But his arm was just, they called a dead arm. He said his arm just went dead on him, and that was the last time he would have represented Canada. And it came down on injuries, right? You know, as a pitcher, you know, if your arm goes, you're not going to be pitching too much. And Rod had pitched so much and so often for Canada that, you know, the '88 Olympics was you know, going to be his last time. And when his arm gave out, he couldn't suit up officially for the team, even though he was on it.
Scott, you mentioned it, but the induction of Heisler obviously represents more of almost a acknowledgement of kind of the history of Canadian baseball. And obviously, you know, it's the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame, but it's also a museum, right? Like, it's about documenting the history of Canadian baseball in a lot of respects. Can you speak to the importance of acknowledging that, and of looking even outside of just, you know, the stars of Major League Baseball, and looking at the importance of the history of Canadian baseball?
For sure. And that's why, again, most of our classes are, you know, are wide ranging. And again, when Rod Heisler was brought to the committee's attention of, you know, what he did in the '70s and '80s, when, you know, the national team wasn't talked about nearly as much as it is now, you know, it was like, wow, that's impressive and that's important. And he should be in our Hall of Fame for what he did for the country in the '70s and '80s. Again, no internet, you know, you always rely on the newspapers and or maybe the odd TV highlight, but probably not much back then of the international game of baseball. So it wasn't really talked about, and it wasn't really known. And then that's part of the way of this class, is now we can spread the history and the knowledge of the game. Because Canadian baseball, I mean, it goes back to 1700s in New Brunswick, right? I mean, there's a huge history. And be able to tell Rod's story is really important to our game, and we hope it draws out other stories that we don't know about yet, or that the country doesn't know about yet, because we want to help tell the stories of baseball.
I love on the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame website how you guys kind of have the quotes from all the inductees after they received the call, letting them know that they've been elected. And from him, like, I think you can just like tell how much it means to all the people as they go in, like kind of through these quotes. And for him, especially with his quote there, and just, not in my craziest dreams would I put myself in any consideration for such an honor. Like, just really cool to kind of see stuff like that for sure.
It is, because again, he's just one of those guys that, oh yeah, I pitched. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he's like, oh yeah, I pitched 13 times. I represent Canada. Like, that's no small feat. And he's just one of those guys that like, yeah, I did it. And when you look at the record books, I mean, he's done it one of the most times ever. And when I called him the first time, he's sort of like, oh, I thought you were going to induct our 84 Olympic team that I was part of. And why are you inducting me? And I'm like, well, Rod, because all these things you did on top of the 84 Olympic team. And he was like, oh, okay. Well, so he's kind of like caught off guard. Like, he thought him and all his teammates from the 84 team were going to be here. And there are a few of his teammates coming to help honor him, which is nice. Fantastic, because some live in Ontario and live relatively close. So that would be a sort of nice little reunion for him and his teammates. But yeah, he's one of those guys that he's just an average Joe that could throw a really good baseball, and he did it 13 times nationally.
Yes, very cool story. Very excited to kind of hear a little bit more from him at the ceremony. Let's move on. Last one of the class, Howard Burney. I think being involved in baseball for 70 years is something, like for me, like obviously I'd love to kind of get to that point, and it's super impressive. For you seeing him go in, like what kind of impact has he had just on baseball in his community, and being one of the community leaders in Toronto for baseball?
It's huge. I mean, whether it's 50, 60, 70 years, I mean, anyone who does anything like that is just amazing in what they do. I mean, he started in the 50s, and he's sort of retired now because, of course, he's getting older. He's been doing stuff since the 50s in baseball. But he just to give back. I mean, he's run Leaside baseball. He's been with Baseball Ontario. He's been with Baseball Canada. He's been he umpires. He's umpired the Pearson Cup games, those exhibition games between the Blue Jays and Expos. Yeah. So that was pretty cool. He sent us a cool picture of Pete Rose up to bat with him umpiring it, and
nice.
So you wonder what conversations might have gone on, but maybe he'll tell us on the weekend. But and it's just like so many years in the game. I mean, last year we did Joe Weichar out of Manitoba, who sort of had the same history, but in Manitoba. So again, it's very important to help honor these provincial people, we'll say, because without them, I mean, Toronto baseball and Leaside baseball, without Howard Burney, it would look nothing the same as it does today. So he's vitally important.
Yeah, super cool story for sure. I mean, we kind of talked about the impact of having these builders and these supporters and the people that don't necessarily do the playing on the field, but are essential to the game. I guess kind of one thing with him, I'm kind of curious if there's been kind of any stories that you've heard so far come out from him since his induction became official.
Howie's, you mean?
Yeah.
There's just a lot of Leaside and Toronto people excited. I mean, again, we're going to have a couple games of Leaside baseball here, so sort of like helping honor Ashley with the girls clinics. Leaside baseball is really excited to bring a bunch of their teams and executives and coaches and players here that day, which is really unique because we don't always have that.
Yeah.
With the Hall of Famers that their hometown wants to really be involved, and so they're going to be on our Premier Diamond and playing a doubleheader that day. One game before the ceremony, one game after the ceremony. So of course they can watch Howie get up on the stage and say his speech, so they can all listen to it, which is really cool. They scheduled it that way, and just really that the team or the city wants to help honor Howie, and they're going to be here that day, which was really unique. Again, to get a phone call quickly from them and saying how can they be involved and what can they do to make Howie's day bigger and better.
Yeah, should be super fun, super excited. I know I'm looking forward to being there. Scott, thank you so much for so much of your time today, and on kind of all your insights and all your stories on all these guys. It's going to be, or all these people going into the Hall of Fame. It's going to be an awesome weekend. Before I let you go, just I guess anything you want to plug about the weekend, and just overall kind of what your thoughts are on the weekend coming up.
Yeah, I mean it's a 3-day weekend. We have a course with the opening pitch starting on the Thursday night, and then our golf tournament on Friday, and the inductions on Saturday. 3 great events. The induction ceremony, it's a free event to attend. It's at 1 o'clock on the June 15th. The museum's open. There's food. There's drinks. There's ball games. There's an auction. There's autographs afterwards, and it's a great baseball day. It's outdoors. It's on our baseball field. The ceremony, and you can just come and enjoy, and you just get to mingle with 1,000 other baseball fans. So, what else could be better than that?
Yes, nothing is better than that, in my opinion, we'll say. Scott, thank you so much for your time. That is going to do it for us here today at the Bird's Eye View podcast. Scott, that's the director of operations at the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame. If you can make it out to the ceremony, I don't recommend it enough. You can follow him and the Hall of Fame on Twitter. That's at CDN Baseball HOF. You can follow all of us. I'm at Worden_Zach. Jori is at J Negin-Shecter. The pod is at BEV_pod. Make sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your pods, and follow and subscribe on YouTube. Thanks so much for listening, and enjoy the ceremony if you're there.